time and making sure that you all can get to the various other fringe and panel events that you will be no doubt subscribed to at this party conference. My name is Will Tanner. I am the Director of Onward. If you don't know who we are a centre-right think tank founded in 2018 to come up with new ideas for the next generation of centre-right thinkers and leaders, with a particular focus on boosting economic opportunity and strengthening the fabric of communities all over the country, but particularly in those places where opportunity and community have been scarce in recent decades. I think we all know those types of places, the type of places that we think about when we think about levelling up. So that's our kind of core focus. And I'm delighted to be chairing this discussion today. Foot on the ladder, can national service help young people to pursue their career ambitions? I think this is a completely vital discussion, one that perhaps doesn't get discussed as much as it potentially could. We know that young people today are less likely to have a secure career than previous generations. They're less likely to own their own home and to put down roots in their community, to have a stake in that regard. They're also less likely to start a family until later in life. And as Onward's work has shown, they are also less likely to volunteer and to be part of local groups in terms of group membership as well. So I think there's a real question mark about the kind of norms and behaviours of younger generations and how we can support younger people to take part in more pro-social, more pro-democratic activity. We also know that kind of social deficit that seems to be developing amongst younger generations is having some quite significant consequences. We released a paper only about a month ago called The Kids Aren't All Right, which looked at a number of factors relating to young people's isolation and alienation. And one of the most striking but worrying statistics we found was the younger people are increasingly turning towards authoritarian forms of politics. So around 45% of 18 to 34-year-olds think that putting the army in charge would be a good way to run the country. That's up from 9% in 1999. And around 61% of young people, so 18 to 35-year-olds, think that having a strong leader who doesn't need to worry about elections or parliament would be a good way to run the country. And you're seeing this across the Western world. So this isn't just Britain. Just had Brothers of Italy elected in Italy a government that at least some people say has more authoritarian tendencies. Their support comes increasingly actually from younger generations. We've seen it with the Front National in France. We've seen it with more authoritarian governments in Sweden and Germany and elsewhere as well. This kind of tendency for younger generations to be turning away from democracy. So I think there's a kind of question before us, not just about how do we integrate young people into society, but how do we use those mechanisms in order to support more democratic behaviours as well. And today's event is looking at that, and specifically at the role of national service, which is something we at Onward have championed, the idea of civic service, putting yourself in service to your community, potentially your country, and the role of that in instilling habits of civic association and contribution amongst younger generations. We know that in other countries like the USA, things like AmeriCorps have been extraordinarily successful in driving that. Similar schemes exist in France with Civic and in Germany and elsewhere. But the UK is relatively unique in not having something like that. So I'm delighted that we're able to discuss why that is and how we might go about addressing it. And we have a fantastic panel here today. I am just going to introduce them all, not in the order in which I intend for them to speak, but Jessie Norman is, I'm delighted to say, a former advisory board member of Onward, albeit for too brief a period, because he joined our advisory board as he left government, but then was very swiftly reinstated to his current role as Minister of State at the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. I hope in a moment we're going to be joined by Bim Afalami, who is the Member of Parliament for Hitchin and Harpenden, a kind of very vocal and prominent member of the 2019 intake, who has spoken really eloquently and powerfully on the difficulties that younger generations are facing and how we can go about supporting younger generations in our society today. And Maura Connolly, who is president of the Voices for National Service, and actually someone, as you were just saying, who was involved earlier in her career in AmeriCorps, so has kind of been through this journey within the United States to bring an international perspective, and also the author of this fantastic book, which I
he hasn't read it yet, so he doesn't know if it's fantastic.
Well, I do. I know. Don't worry. And finally, Matt Illich, who is the Chief Development Officer of Catch-22, someone who I'm not sure we actually crossed over in Downing Street Policy Unit, Matt, but someone who previously, like me, has worked at the top of government in number 10 Downing Street, and so understands this from both a kind of civic and governmental policy perspective. We only have an hour or so, so I'm going to leave my introductions there, and I'm going to, Matt, I was going to start with Bim, but as Bim is keeping us waiting, I might, if I may, come to you to start off, and then I'll come to Amora, and then I'll come to Jesse if Bim is still not with us. So,
sure.
Matt, can you give us...
And if Bim doesn't show up, it means we have an extra 2.5 minutes each or so, which is great news. But no, on a serious note, it's great to be here, and it's an issue that's so close to my heart, and not least because we as Catch-22 have been involved in the delivery of the Year of Service pilot, which amongst the few things that I've been involved in the last couple of years has been one of the best. And the background that, of course, we do this in, you would have seen in your briefing, is that the pandemic and everything else that flowed from it was particularly tough and disproportionate for young people. Young people were disproportionately affected by unemployment in the course of the pandemic, and they are disproportionately affected in the lingering effects of the pandemic, so mental health, loneliness and isolation. But also a panel that I was on this morning at 8:30 talking about underemployment, so the fact that youth unemployment is not low by historic levels, and is not even the lowest in the rest of Europe or the world, but that young people are more likely to be in precarious, low security, low prospect employment, partly because of this issue in transitioning from a system that prepares them for certain end games and careers, and a world that's actually rapidly moving and advancing, and technology that's advancing at an exponential pace, green infrastructure that's translating at an exponential pace. And so we're not preparing them for the world of tomorrow, which is moving so fast. So the superficial features that we find ourselves in is this kind of period of fairly low unemployment and record vacancies, 1.27 million vacancies, but also this lingering kind of youth unemployment and underemployment, and a real kind of apathy about the future. So where do programs like Service Year and National Citizen Service and general kind of service come in to help? Well, I think we have to first start by being very honest about the appraisal of the situation. And for me, and I'll partly speak as a citizen really, because I'm foreign born, so there are two aspects to my own life experience that are quite formative and very instrumental that I think relates today. One is rites of passage, which is that as we sort of transition from adolescence into adulthood, it's incredibly important to go through a process where you genuinely start to see yourself as a person, as an adult, as a citizen, as somebody with stake in society, and somebody that's looking forward to contributing in the future. And the other is social capital, which is the networks, the connections that you hopefully build to spaces and places that aren't from the spaces and places that you're coming from. And for me personally, one was becoming a British citizen in 2003, and therefore being able to go to university for free, more or less for free at that point in time. I know it's different these days, but and also I should say the rite of passage was much more simplistic than the citizenship test and various things that people get to do nowadays. So I think actually it's got better since, but one big thing was becoming a citizen and actually being part of this sort of civic institution of Britain. And then the other, in terms of social capital, was things like going to university and being able to connect to new groups and networks. And I think those things are essential to life success, and some people sadly realise this way too late. And programs like this, I think, are essential to being able to connect them to aspiration and opportunity. So I'm drawing a couple of examples, and I'll talk about Year of Service in particular. One of the other things that I've had great privilege of being involved in is something called Unlocked Graduates, which is a program that supports high-flying Russell Group graduates to become prison officers. And it's a really good kind of sort of jumping off point into year of service, because how do you get somebody that's kind of qualified to a really high degree to do a job that has very low social status, pays relatively poorly compared to other graduate jobs, and is actually incredibly dangerous if you look at sort of stats around prisons nowadays. And the central points are, well, it's something that changes the world, that appeals to lots of young people. It's something that makes them feel part of a group, and it's something that actually converts them into a relatively high responsibility, highly paid job to begin with. And I think lots of those things are borne out in the year of service as a concept, as well as the year of service pilot that we've had the privilege to be involved in. And so just to kind of give you a sort of flavour of what's been a feature sort of so far. So the programme has supported about 300 people in the year to date. I think there's a few more months left of this particular wave, all 18 to 24-year-olds from different walks of life. It's been built by NCS and through a partnership of NCS and other employers, and has had some specific themes, including the theme of supporting public service recovery, which I think is quite essential and appeals to that civic responsibility that young people, I think, innately have. The idea that you can support environmental recovery or the recovery of certain public services like health or social care or others that were extremely distressed in the course of the pandemic. So how can you connect that idea of having a stake with sort of building civic responsibility and nationhood, and also actually building skills, experience and networks whilst being paid? I think there aren't that many things to it. And in terms of the impact that we've already seen, so globally 82% of members that have completed the programme are progressing onto employment or education, and nearly 3/4 of them have previously been out of work, unemployed, and even from our Catch 22 perspective, about 10% of the delivery, so 36 participants or so, all of them reporting improvement in skills. And one of the particular appeals, I think, of what we've tried to do through the programme is connect it to national policy like Kickstart and the funding that government had put out to support young people. But dare I say, in my experience, there is something where I think young people want to lead, but they also want to be led, and kind of youth policy chronically over the last 5 to 6, maybe longer years has been fairly high level and arguably not interventionist enough. I think just not painting the kind of picture of the destination where we want our youth to be, any more than painting a destination where what roles we want people to fulfill, essentially, in the labour market. But clearly programmes such as this and others deliver obvious benefits. So benefits to those members directly, real life work experience, living wage, employability, skills, confidence. Members benefits to communities, so young people actually operating their communities and bringing value to them, like the points I mentioned around recovery and helping environmental regeneration and so on. And I think it's also benefits to employers. So the number of employers that you speak to in employability programs will say it's really hard to get young people engaged, really hard to get diversity. Well, it's like, how hard are you trying? And again, coming from the underemployment session this morning, it's clear that something needs to be turned on its head, whereby you've got people that want to do the work, and you've got record vacancies, and just something is kind of getting lost in translation. So what role can we do to activate that? And my view is that it's not really about money. I think there's plenty of money going on this year. You've got nearly 13 billion in the adult skills budget, and several billion in the national skills strategy. And I think it's just misaligned. And the reason being that it's just not keeping pace with what modernity is throwing at us. And maybe there's a bit of a blindness as to where young people are left. But in 10 years' time, 80 or 90% of the people we talk about, young people now, will be in the workforce, and they will be significant actors in that workforce. And that's why I think we need to take a slightly longer term view as to what that investment will actually yield. So the world's uncertain by nature, but with the right support at the right time, I think we can really help young people seize and capitalise the opportunity. And I think it is about leadership rather than money. Thanks.
Fantastic. Matt, thank you so much. And it's really brilliant to actually start this discussion with some practical examples of where service in different guises is transforming both young people's lives and the communities that they serve, and particularly useful to have the UK Year of Service example, which is obviously something that Jamie and we at Onward have been talking about for some time and are great supporters of, so thank you. I'm now going to come to Anmora Connolly it's been a long day, to talk a little bit about the international experience before I come to Jessie, and then I'll open up to questions.
Thank you so much, Will, and thanks for having me. I double click on everything Matt said, and so I don't think I have a ton more to add. I will share a little of the U.S. experience. We have been operating the AmeriCorps program in the U.S. for almost 30 years now. It was born at a time when our country and our society looked very different than it does now, but it has interestingly adapted itself along the way to meet the moment, as we have had moment after moment. And I'm actually now going to change the thing that I always talk about, which is the triple bottom line. I'll tell you what mine is, but I'm going to add Matt, so now I have a quadruple bottom line. One, obviously, is the benefit to the young people who serve. We have some incredible UK Year of Service participants here. You can talk to them afterwards, but that's the skills building, and in a real way around employability and expectations, so sort of high expectations and high support at the same time. So it's you got to show up on time, you have to be in your uniform, you have to be ready to go to work, and we're going to help you develop the ability to do that. You're going to learn about public speaking, you're going to be presenting your work to others. Obviously, the impact that folks like these young women have on the communities they serve. In the case of City or UK, it's about serving students. In the case of Matt's organization, it's really around sort of the net zero or green jobs work. And so, really thinking about the impact on the community. And if you get those two things right, they're mutually reinforcing, right? So if you're supporting young people to do the work and they're having an impact, they're going to be realizing a sense of agency around the work. And those two things are sort of inextricably linked. The third bottom line in my construct is what it does for society. So it builds social cohesion. We have a study of AmeriCorps alumni that said that 90% of them report after their year of service that they have developed the ability to work across lines of difference. So work with people that may have a different point of view, maybe of a different background, but they have developed the ability to do that. And then the fourth I will add is the employer piece of this, which is, thank you, Matt, for that. I have a whole new spiel now when I go back to the U.S., which really is around employers looking at this as a stream of well-supported, well-developed, mission-oriented human capital that can help address the issues facing our communities. You all were the inventors of the gap year. We like to think of national service as a leap year. It's really it's not taking time away. It's really investing in the next generation, helping people think about their next move, and also importantly supporting them to get there. We have about 8 in 10 of AmeriCorps alums report that their AmeriCorps experience actually helped them in their career, and about half of them say that literally the connections they made during their year of service actually led to their next job. So you can see real tangible benefits coming out of this. And on the government side, really thinking about it from the point of view of the issues facing countries, like our countries both just have been through with the rest of the world, the COVID pandemic. AmeriCorps played a pivotal role in helping communities immediately on the ground set up testing sites, set up housing for folks that were housing insecure, make sure that elderly folks got their medicines and their food on time. And AmeriCorps, because they were trained and ready at the get-go, could sort of spring into action right away. You've probably all heard about the storms that have hit the southeastern United States. AmeriCorps is on the front lines, as they have been through almost every major natural disaster for the last 30 years, helping to organize volunteers, set up support sites for folks. It's actually a really interesting story. The storms that hit New Jersey, this is now probably 10 years ago, and this is an example of what really smart, passionate young people can do. In the olden days in the U.S., if you wanted to sign up for services after a disaster like that, your home has been flooded, you've lost your home completely, whatever it is, you would have to go to a place, find that place to say, how do I go sign up for public services to support my family, get food, get a roof over our heads, that kind of thing. These very intrepid AmeriCorps members actually were sort of wandering around trying to help people get directions to wherever the central site was where they could sign up for services. And they said, we have iPads. Why don't we just go to people who've been affected and say, here are the things you can sign up for. Let's sign you up right now. So you don't have to. And that's the genius, of course, of young people who are much more technology literate than I am. But that's an example of the innovation that's happening on the AmeriCorps side. I'll tell you one other natural disaster example. We had now probably 20 years ago in Joplin, Missouri, there were a series of tornadoes. You may have missed this. It's a very small community in the Midwest of the United States. Those tornadoes leveled the town. And the first people on the ground were AmeriCorps members, helping families recover what they could, get connected to services, find places to stay, and those AmeriCorps members stayed. And to the point where there actually is now a bronzed AmeriCorps helmet in the town square, because this poor community had been hit so hard by these tornadoes, and they were just flabbergasted by the outpouring of support from these energetic young people who were ready to go in the wake of that awful moment. There's an interesting story, actually, that most people don't know, which is that the deputy administrator of our Federal Emergency Management Agency showed up on the scene the day after the tornadoes hit, and he was sort of baffled. Who are these young people running around? They've got T-shirts with an A on the shoulder. You know, who are these young people? They're amazing. And it turns out that emergency management in the U.S. had an aging workforce. So they would have older retired folks come and show up in the wake of a disaster. They could stay for a couple of weeks, but then they'd go home, and the community would be left trying to figure out, after something like that, it's not a 2-week job, right? We're rebuilding an entire community. So AmeriCorps stayed. This guy said, how do I get more of those young people? And as a result of that, today we have FEMA Corps, which is a partnership between our emergency management agency in the U.S. and AmeriCorps. There are many, many other examples, many disaster related, but many non-disaster related, that I could share with you about the way in which AmeriCorps has been tapped to help the country meet the moment, and to help young people play a pivotal role in helping the country meet the moment. And I think, a lot of what we are all facing in the wake of COVID, of social isolation, people feeling disconnected, young people particularly feeling like they don't have chances. This is an opportunity for us to say, we want your ideas, we want your know-how, we want your passion, we want your mission-oriented self to show up, and we'll support you to help you do that. A tiny bit about the way AmeriCorps is structured in the U.S. Unlike some of our other service programs like the Peace Corps, it is not, it is a grants program run by the federal government. And so what the original design of this was to say to communities, tell us what your needs are, come to us with proposals. We will give you, in effect, human capital grants to help support you to deploy, recruit, train young people, passionate, diverse young people. And so it is not a top-down government program. It really is leveraging local know-how, really responding to what local communities want. And it's been a powerful partnership between the private sector and our central government and our governors, because importantly, our governors are the ones that know best what their states need and can help deploy resources accordingly. And so I think it's a pretty innovative model. We've had to adjust it, of course, over the years to adapt it to meet the moment in various different ways, but it's been a pretty powerful force in our country. And the last thing I will say is, I like to say this is the thing we can all agree on. When we are at a moment in so many parts of the world, your country, our country, everywhere, where people feel so divided, this is an opportunity for folks to come together in service, to roll up their sleeves despite whatever differences may separate them in other ways, and to work toward the common good. We have very broad, deep bipartisan support, and have since the beginning of AmeriCorps, which is saying something in our country, especially today. But we do have very conservative members of members of Congress, conservative governors, and folks on the more progressive side as well, also supporting this, because they sort of believe this is the best of America, if you will. And so their question is, how do we come together to get more of this? Today there are about 75,000 AmeriCorps members serving annually, and there have been about 1.4 million that have served over the course of the lifetime of the program. We are still pushing for more, because we feel like every young person should be given the opportunity to serve and should be asked to contribute. And so we are still pushing for more, but we are also excited about the track record so far, and really delighted to be here to share our experience with you. I've seen lots of great work in the UK Year of Service pilot, and had the chance to talk to some of the folks who are serving, and I think there's really something powerful to work with there that could be scaled. Thank you.
Maura, thank you so much. It's so valuable to have that experience from the US, and to give a kind of a genuine kind of roots to the discussion in terms of how the whole movement has really developed across the water. So thank you. Jesse.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Will. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you, fellow panelists. I am a completely unreconstructed, lifelong, enthusiastic volunteer to the point of idiocy. And thinking about what Anne was saying reminded me of a moment when I was in Hereford. I'd just been adopted as a candidate in 2007. I was very keen to make a good impression. We had these appalling floods in July 2007, and Newtown Road and the back of Edgar Street were under 3 feet of water. And we happened to be canvassing around there. So I said to the team, look, stop, we're not canvassing, we're going to go move sandbags and help local people. And we, I basically spent all morning moving sandbags and stuff. And then I noticed that in one house, there was a woman who looked rather kind of stricken. I thought to myself, St. George and the Dragon, this is the moment. So I went down. So I said, is there anything, do you need anything? You're obviously trapped, there's water everywhere. It's obviously flooded. And I said, she said, well, we are a bit short. And I said, well, what do you need? And so she kind of reeled off a few things. I grabbed a 10 quid note, thrust it into the hands of one of my team and said, look, run around the corner, grab a whole bunch of these things, bread, eggs, the usual stuff, milk, and other essentials, and we'll see if we can help this poor lady. So we, he came back. I managed to make my way up the path. My legs are completely sopping. I reach out and I stand on the side. I managed to carry the bag up to her. I put it in her hands. She says, "Thank you so much. Absolutely fantastic. I'm incredibly grateful." Yeah, it's my first visit to Hereford, actually. We're in Yorkshire. We come from Yorkshire. I must say it's an awfully nice place you've got here. And I thought to myself, I haven't even been able to help one of my constituents. But I didn't feel bad about it, because I think actually that's, in a way, the secret of what we're talking about today. Let me talk a little bit about my own experience, and then a bit about volunteering and national service in particular, and then a bit about slightly more theoretical things. So, I wrote a book about 12 years ago called The Big Society, which was about trying to think about all of those sources of social energy that aren't, as it were, just state-driven or indeed necessarily individual-driven. So, the things that sit between the two sides, what you might call the ethical and the political, reaching for some theory of community, if you like. And I thought a lot about that at that time, about the idea of national service and whether we could generate a way of systematically, structurally liberating that incredible energy people have individually. And I spent a lot of time in the States. I'd seen how they did in America. I was incredibly in awe of that. And so that was very exciting. I'd also seen what we'd been doing at setting up the Roundhouse in London, which is a kind of performing arts space where everyone knows about it. I mean, when we were raising money for it in the 1990s, you'd go in and ask for money, and then everyone would start giggling. And the reason was because they'd snogged their first boy or girl, or had their first spliff during, at the back of the Cream concert, or, Jimi Hendrix or the Doors or something. And so it turned out to be easier to raise money than we thought, but although it's still quite hard. But the point is that liberates a lot of young people and gives them this sense of, incredible, more than 50% black and minority ethnic, people from very, very tough estates, the back of Chalk Farm in London, serious deprivation areas. And so cool stuff. And what I came up with was this essential idea that, I didn't come up with it, I channeled others who'd thought about it, that if you can structure ways in which we get people away from their usual channels, get them to mix with each other, get social engagement of all sides, in a way that we've increasingly see less because of this phenomenon of assortative mating. Where broadly speaking, middle class kids go out with other middle class kids, and posh kids go out with other posh kids, all the way up. If you could find a way of building skills by using volunteering, and there's incredible amount of evidence that actually, when people give money or when they volunteer their time, they are happier, and they are better connected, and they have just those things alone kind of create a positive social and mental energy. And the reason for that is because we now know that actually what drives people is this quest for AMP, like autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So autonomy, are you in charge of your own life? Mastery, can you do something really well? Purpose, is it for some other higher cause, not just about yourself? So as a cure for the kind of rampant individualism that we see in society, which is a kind of, it's atomic, not just in the sense of thinking of an individual as being cut off from other organizations and other people, and therefore needing community. It's also atomic in the sense of thinking of the individual as cut off from their own roots and their own tradition community in that sense, kind of Burkean sense. I think it's incredibly important if we can foster that AMP, that sense of purpose. Now, how do we do that? Well, I think we go back to Aristotle. So what does Aristotle say? 3 things that are useful to us, right? One is the inside and the outside are intimately linked. Okay, so you can think of people smiling because they're happy, or you can think of people being happy because they smile. Let me tell you, if you smile a lot, you are just happier. I taught my kids that when they were scared, you just have to go ho 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 to yourself and stop being scary. Just say ho ho ho. Believe me, try it sometime. You'll see it's a bizarre thing. It's a fact about human nature. Go ho ho ho, and everything stops being as frightening as it was before. The other thing is habit. The way virtue is habit. Aristotle's right about this. So if you want to have positive social other virtues, you just start doing it. Begin, start, get involved, build a habit, and then it's like playing a musical instrument. You're rubbish to start off with. You're rubbish on the second day. You're rubbish on the second week. If you keep doing it, at some point, very quickly, surprisingly quickly, with your enthusiasm, you get good at it. The other thing is this Aristotelian idea of being an active citizen, playing an active role in your community. And I think the other thing that's absolutely marvellous about national service is that it does instill a certain desire to think about, well, what is it that matters, not just for you yourself, or indeed for your children, but what matters for those around you who might not be in the same place that you're in, or may not have the same background that you're in. A kind of civic awareness. We've seen this recently, right? How many people did you see queuing up in that astonishing line to see the coffin of Her Majesty the Queen? Now, why were they doing that? I don't think that many of them knew why they were doing it. They just knew it was important. There was something about them, something about their civic awareness and understanding that made it important for them to do that. I think national service of the kind we're talking about, a kind of voluntary, and we have a national citizen service, as you know, which we haven't talked about, but which I think has been, in many ways, a fantastic program. I think it's something about that, and if it means that you come to an understanding of the benefits of a constitutional monarchy in an age of populism, well, that's even better. That's a slightly contentious point. I might ask Aaron Moore to comment on that. But my point is, you get a sense of the world around you, and perhaps theoretically and politically as well as just individually. So, final question: how are we actually going to move towards a form of national service? Maybe that's something we can discuss. We have national citizen service. It's short courses. I went on an Outward Bound course when I was very young. It was a completely catalytic moment for me in many ways. It would be fantastic to take the full panoply of the experiences of other countries, largely in many cases America, but other parts as well, and kind of build on that. We do know that it can't be national service in the sense that we normally think of it. Right, it can't be 2 years of compulsory labour because the kids get dead bored, they don't have the appetite for it, they won't be compelled to do anything, in case you hadn't noticed. And so we've got to find ways of combining nudges and excitement and habit and building from that. But there's enormous scope. There's really no reason why we should do vastly more of it. And it doesn't all have to be about government. Right? It can be about local leadership, about community organisations, companies, individuals, and all the rest of it. Thank you.
Jesse, thank you very much. That's a fantastic way to close our contributions from the panel. And there are 2 things that you said that made me chuckle. The first was that if you say ho ho ho, you no longer be scared, because my son is called Horatio, so I say ho ho the whole time.
The genius. That is exactly.
Maybe one reason why I'm never scared.
I hope he's never frit as a result. He's
he's
high
a
energy,
very cheerful fellow.
How lovely.
Yes, and the other thing, just on a more serious note, was what you said about Her Majesty the Queen, and you're totally right about all of those tens of thousands of people who went and queued for hours and hours on end in order to pay their respects. But actually, the Queen herself was an amazing. I mean, the example to trump all others of someone who gave her life towards national service and did it, I think, for all of the reasons that we are talking about today: the desire for contribution, the belief in the power of association, and mixing with all manner of different people in order to enrich our lives. And I think we can learn something about service from that, particularly for younger generations. So that's a fantastic way to close this part of the discussion. But now I want to hear from you. And I would like, if people have questions, if you can raise your hand. I might take 1 or 2 at a time. So if I take this woman here and this woman over here to start off with, and then I will come to others. We've got plenty of time for questions. So if you could say who you are and where you're from as well.
Hi, I'm Stella, Head of Policy from Castro. I really like everything you just said. My question is, general, I guess. Why do you think that young people over the last few decades have become more alienated, and why do you think they find it so hard, or they don't seem as eager, I guess, to be engaged with their community?
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much.
I'm Caroline Crossley. I work for the Conservation Volunteers, which is another one of the partners in the UK Youth Service Programme. I'm very proud that we've had about 10% of the placements come through and amazingly well. My question, totally appreciate the value of volunteering.
Yeah.
I think that volunteering is becoming quite polarised. You've either got people who are unemployed and haven't got health work who can volunteer, or people who can afford to volunteer. And it's that sector in the middle, the young people who are trying to pay off debts or haven't even got to university yet. How do we support and enable them to do that?
So what do we do about the missing
Programs
middle?
like UK Youth Service, but how do we do that?
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. I'll come back for further questions. Matt, could I come to you first?
Yeah, I'll have a go at Stella's question. I'm not sure how straightforward the answer is, but I think what I've sort of sensed in the last sort of few years is that young people stay young for longer, not in terms of age, but in terms of relationships, home ownership, level of income, general kind of stake in what they're doing. And I even look at it through the kind of generations, because I've got younger siblings, and there's 12 years between me and my younger sister, and our worlds are kind of completely polarized apart in terms of home ownership, relationships, general kind of maturation, being able to move out of home, the kind of things that are available to you, the sort of prospects you look for. And so I think there's something intrinsic where that experience means that young people feel like they have less of a stake. And I read something, if you were born in 2000, your entire experience will have been clouded by a series of sort of economic crises, sort of geopolitical instability, the pandemic, and so on. And I think that's really, really tough, where therefore experiences like the ones that we've talked about are actually more essential, and we've possibly seen a greater reticence to kind of commit to them. Because if you think about the things that sort of, where you were able to kind of mint citizenship in previous years, it is through sort of collective experiences. Yes, military drafts at various points in the course of history, but other opportunities such as big sort of national traditions, 2012 Olympics, all those kinds of moments where you could try and calibrate and capture some of that community spirit. And so I think it's been a combination of how much kind of economically young people have become dislodged, feeling like they genuinely have less capital in the system and therefore are less kind of bought into it. And I think in parallel, the sort of rise of technology has made them a bit more atomized and individualistic, because they're sort of spending time consuming certain things as opposed to sort of getting out there in communities. I think that's one of the other kind of intended benefits of programs like this, is that you get them out of their house and get them participating as much as possible. And also that kind of the dearth of the sort of skills development that's kind of slightly left them behind. And again, I come from a kind of promise that if you go to university and you get good grades and you'll kind of have good jobs. We were of a sort of generation where 50% of people should have been going to university. And I remember being on a panel a couple of years back with young people whose A-level results were initially decided by algorithm and then subsequently decided by sort of the teacher assessment. And I think when that happens, some of the things that one takes for granted at a point in time suddenly start to disrupt kind of futures and create that further dislocation. So I think there've been macro trends that have created dislocation, and they haven't been helped by a real reticence to invest in kind of shared and collective moments of experience such as this.
Fantastic, thank you. Jesse, I don't know if you want to tackle that question, or possibly this question about how you support the missing middle.
Yeah, just to add a couple of things to what Matt's just said. I do think that there are a couple of other aspects just to look at. One is social media. Has the effect of often kind of enclosing people in some way, or perhaps taking up a lot of their time in a way that a previous generation might have spent kind of engaging with others. I do think there's a sense of being trapped a little bit, ennui, some of that generation. I have kids who've kind of in social contexts that kind of express that. I think the other thing is, I think there's a lot of worry about climate change. And I think all those things, create a sense that I never got to show my worth in battle. I never got to wrestle with these things. I'm living in a world of extreme uncertainty and disruption, and COVID, and validates this, and financial stuff. Oh, and by the way, we're all going to get torched. I mean, it's an appalling. If you are, young people often worry about death. I mean, everyone does, but in particular, this kind of thing is a serious conditioning factor. On the question of polarization, I think it's easy to be a little Manichaean about this. I don't personally think that you would find that there's a really strong cut between people who can afford to volunteer and others. I think broadly speaking, everyone can afford to volunteer in different ways. And if you've got a lower income, often it's because you're underemployed, and therefore you do have time when you could potentially invest in other networks, other things that would give you pleasure and give you meaning in your life, even if you were not immediately able to lift your income. And I think that isn't a way of saying that there isn't a kind of class bias to volunteering, because there may well be a class bias to volunteering. It's a way of saying that no one should feel that this is something that's not for them. Everyone can do it. And what's very interesting, if you look at church groups, they reach right through the social spectrum. And often some of the most vigorous and highest energy ones are in the poorest communities, where everyone's basically giving to support each other, precisely because they know what adversity is like. So I think what we can do is in the first place just to kind of recognise that and not allow ourselves to be drawn into a purely Women's Institute view of volunteering, because I don't think that's actually the reality of it. And in my experience, I mean, it's famously true that some of the most resilient communities are ones where people have very low incomes but are basically supporting each other at times of crisis. And it would be nice, it's a slightly orthogonal point, but it would be nice to have which is a posh way of saying it's an irrelevant point, but I'll just say it'd be nice to have more of a national debate where we think in terms of the ability everyone to lean in to support a community at a particular moment, or everyone to lean in to support each other. When we had that a bit during the pandemic, we've seen it in many places where you have natural disasters, and was pointed that out. We don't have a lot of natural disasters in that sense. We haven't got a hurricane season in Britain. We don't have an earthquake fault particularly, but I just think that kind of ethos would really help us. And actually in America, they have this thing about raising the roof tree. Of a house, you move into a community and everyone builds you a house, and then when someone else moves into a community, you build a house with them for that person. That kind of thing. And I personally find the difference between people who've actually exercised a degree of personal control, practical engagement like that, and people who've just always lived in a merely theoretical way is absolutely night and day. And I'm always rather excited about the people who've done both.
I think, just to put it into context, I've worked in the voluntary sector for 30 years.
Yeah.
And supported volunteers from all walks of life. And I totally agree, there are people who have the least, can contribute amazingly in many ways. And it's that whole thing, sometimes you're time rich and cash poor.
Yes.
Those people do give amazing. There's also the people who have the financial support, or families and partners who can support them to volunteer. I'm talking about those people in the middle who are maybe struggling, the underemployed, so might be very busy working and trying to pay off debts and so on, or people who have got caring responsibilities that struggle, that I think are some of the people that would benefit so much from that social engagement and care and being part of something, but for some reason haven't got the resources or capacity to do that. And that's very much the story I've been hearing from some of the UK Euroservice participants that we've had working with us, that a scheme like this has enabled them to do something that they wouldn't have been otherwise able to do. And so my point was really trying to say how brilliant this scheme is and how do we make sure that we can support that going forward.
Thank you. And Maura, can I ask, do you see the same patterns within the US context?
Yes, and I would add to the list that Matt shared, the 24-hour news cycle. You cannot escape the news. It's on your phone 24/7, and it it does have an impact, I think, on mental health. I do want to just what's your name? Caroline. I just want to double down on what she just said, which is I think just to sort of sharpen the point that there is a rich history in this country. I've seen in the many years I've been coming over here in support of this work, rich history of volunteering and community engagement and connectedness between people and communities. But this missing link of a UK year of service that's really sort of like a very intensive challenge and support opportunity for young people that comes with enough financial support that everybody who wants to do it can do it is the key. And that is the opportunity, I think, to sort of look at how we might work together. I don't live here, and I'm not a citizen of the UK, although sometimes I feel like I am. And had I been here, I would have lined up for the Queen as well. But I think there is a real opportunity here to kind of lean into this idea as a very specific slice of that continuum of service and volunteering in the UK that is maybe less well developed than some of the other areas that have a rich, long history. And I think a piece of the puzzle to why young people feel disconnected sometimes is because we don't ask them to lead or contribute, and then we don't support them to develop the skills and abilities they need to be able to do that. And so I think the combination of a call to service with a scaled up series of opportunities for people to make a difference against the things that matter to them. To your point, the climate is a major issue facing all of our countries. Young people believe deeply in it. Education, supporting younger students that are struggling. I think there's just a lot of pent-up talent and passion and commitment in our young people that we're not finding the right ways to tap and enable. And I think the financial support that the UK Year of Service is providing folks to be able to do this for a year, it's not forever, right? It's a year. To be able to do that is an experience that will have life-changing benefits for them and for the people they serve and for their communities.
Thank you. Can I just add one last thing, which is we're doing some work as part of our Social Fabric programme on changing use of time. And the really interesting thing is that we have this perception that we're all working more, we're all sleeping less, we're all more rushed. And that's not true on average. None of those things are true on average. We work less, we sleep more. On average, we are less rushed than we were in the past. But certain groups in society are working considerably more, sleeping considerably less, and are considerably more rushed. And it's some of the, so it's particularly actually women. People in voluntary organisations, indeed, but and people on low incomes in particular, and also some people in insecure work as well. And so I think that when we talk about this, we should not just be talking in the round. We should be also talking about very specific groups. So I thought your point about kind of the polarisation was actually very, very, very powerful. Okay, we've got about 10 minutes left or so. So this is probably going to be the final round of questions. So if people want to ask, so there's a gentleman at the back and there's a gentleman here. Okay, we'll take those two, and then I think that will probably be it. So, gentleman.
So, Richard from Prince's Trust, and yeah, Matt, it'd be great to catch up about your experience of delivering so far. So my question is, in terms of increasing the scale of the year of service, what do you think, well, the panel, this is across the panel, I think the best way to do this would be, is this incremental from the bottom up on the basis of enthusiasm of employers and providers, or are we looking for a grand top-down manifesto targets, either in participation numbers or financial commitment?
Fantastic, thank you, Richard.
So just thank you very much, first of all, for having just wonderful, and it's a high point of my conference that I've come to about Aristotle and habits as well. No, because I wrote a book about him, so I'm very pleased.
Very good.
So I work with a very, very diverse student community. I've just got a couple of thoughts, really. One is my flag packet kind of like assessment thus far with the freshers this year who arrived, and our institution is 60% women, 50% black, 55% thirsty families go to university, half of them having to work to be able to come into higher education, is that there's a relationship between the confidence, ability, and willingness to step up, and whether your mum and dad are hourly paid or not, because you count time, which is a completely different way to the son of a teacher. And I think it'd be really interesting to map that and compare that.
So what is the correlation?
The correlation to, if your dad's a security guard paid by the hour, and you're being asked to step up as a student volunteer, you're thinking of it by the hour.
So you're much less likely to do it.
Less likely.
Okay, that's really
So
interesting.
it'd be
Really
to map it
interesting.
across and see if there's some commonality. And then just two thoughts really, which is, first one is, could we have a national service by permissive legislation rather than by requirement? So we have a community right to save an asset. Why couldn't we have a citizen's right to a year of service, which is funded if you step up? Yeah, but that it comes with a social capital pool as well, a bit like a black congregation in the States. If you step up to adopt a kid, the congregation commits to babysit with you, save with you, to give time with you, etc. so you're not on your own. And then the second thing is, how could we accredit those who step up that we don't normally notice? And I have a recollection, I was thinking about it as you were speaking, that in Liverpool they were accrediting young carers, and they were doing it by sending teachers out to find the carers, young carers, and then giving them a prize. The Liverpool Post threw on a feature about all these amazing kids who looked after mum and dad before school. So how can we have a scheme that went looking through the networks like these here for those kids that have stepped up but that aren't formally on a scheme to accredit? Yeah, so that's permissive and accrediting, which gets around your compulsion feature and maybe unlocks a new sort of talent. Just thinking out loud in response to each other.
Thank you.
But always start with Aristotle's framework.
Yeah, indeed. Everything starts with Aristotle.
Very good. What's your name, by the way?
Francis Davis.
Francis, very nice. Thank you very much.
Jesse, do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, that's two fabulous questions. Thank you so much. Let me start with the question. I mean, in a way, you're kind of getting the same question. How do you build a year of service? What are the components that kind of sit behind that? And you've both said some things much cleverer than I was going to, but let me just add a couple of thoughts. So I think, personally, there are three components to it. The individual has to do something, their community has to do something, and then possibly the state has to do something. And there might be a component such as a Prince's Trust sitting alongside that, or some other energizing yeast. That could be a company. But I think those three things are the component. Individuals got to do something because they've really got to put some skin in the game, so they're not just issuing an IOU. Same habit thing, right? I want to know this person's going to discharge. Either that, or they can show me stuff in the past that lets me have a rational belief that they will be good for the commitment, because it's an incredible waste of time. There's the community's, the taxpayers, everyone's, if that's not working. I think the second thing is the idea that all the people around them are invested in their success and are going to help them, but also, frankly, going to slightly, a little bit, if they're not quite stepping up to the plate. I don't want to overemphasize that, but just something. You see this, it's like the caricature microfinance, right? You lend the money to the women's circle, except it only goes to one individual. Everyone else knows that if that person repays, they then are in line to get the next. So everyone's contributing. So that kind of sense of collective involvement. And then I think the other point you very helpfully raised is this point about accreditation. You need multiple sources of motivation to do it, and I found accreditation. Even something that seems incredibly trivial, and I'll give you an example in a second, is an extreme motivator, particularly to this very highly credentially oriented generation we have now. And they want stuff to put on the CV. They're very keen to make incremental, gradated progress that kind of they can point to and others can point to, and it's an important source of self-esteem. Always has been, but I guess more so now than anywhere. Little example. So I ran a volunteer week in Herefordshire for some young people, and we did a bunch of silly things and kind of ran up a few hills and went to see various things and got involved and just did some stuff. It was great. And at the end of the week, we had a little party, and I gave everyone a little certificate saying, "You've been fantastic, thank you so much, love, Jesse." They loved the certificate. They absolutely framed it. I couldn't believe it. I regard my own contribution as virtually nil, in fact possibly negative. So the idea that someone might be excited about it was a complete eye-opener to me, and taught me not to be so pompous, actually. This was something that mattered to them. We'd done something important. They valued it. I valued the fact they'd valued it, and we were going to recognise it. So I think those components are, I think something of that, in that ilk, is going to do well.
Fantastic. Jesse, thank you. Matt, and then I'm going to come down more.
Yeah, I'll start with that latter question from Francis. I think it's right, and I think there's something about how that accreditation gets valued, because there's lots of ways in which we still traditionally value accreditation in the context of what qualifications you've attained and where you've attained it from, and potentially there's something quite intrinsic to these experiences that are more valuable to the individual and how they can progress in their life and subsequently than the actual certification itself. So if you think about some of the experiences that we've discussed earlier today, they're more likely to be building some of those innate kind of resiliences and other kind of capabilities and competencies that aren't going to be captured on a certificate. I think the reward and recognition is essential in kind of spurring people on and making them feel valued, but actually some of the things they build will really last them a lifetime, and they might not even realise it at that point in time. I think I certainly realise lots of juvenile experiences that are incredibly important to me right now, but only take some time to actually work out what the value of that is. And Richard, to your point, I think I think the kind of the costs of something like this are baked in, but no one's really looking at them. And what I mean by that is that the costs of not doing it are baked in. So be it the cost of unemployment or the cost of prison, and we're always very keen to tell people to sort of get on their bike, but not really ask the question of whether they have one or whether someone's taught them to ride it. And so those costs are kind of ever present, but how do you kind of get upstream of that? And that's that perennial question of the reward and the feedback loop for politicians. And I think ditto on the kind of skill side and the employer side, and we talk quite a bit about money that's committed to FE or the apprenticeship levy and so on, and these are astronomical numbers, not as astronomical as some of the ones that we started last week on, but certainly enough to kind of move tens of thousands of young people into this service. And I think if you look at it in that context, in those tens of thousands will then unlock potential for others. Back to my kind of earlier example of be it the Teach First or the Unlocks of this world, they are a small segment of the overall teacher or prison officer workforce, but they have a huge bearing on the experiences of those institutions when they ultimately end up leading them, and the experiences of the children and the other teachers that end up coming up through them. So I think there's a kind of a spillover effect from the investment in programs like this that is no one's counting anywhere. And that's something that we've got to get the likes of Treasury and others better at.
Indeed. Well, the Teach First being the classic example because it has spawned several other, Unlocked, were both.
And Teach First are everywhere. It's the last 10 years,
Indeed. Aaron Moore.
So far be it from me to tell you how to organize national service in this country, but I would say that I've been listening a lot to conversations about things like the apprenticeship levy that may or may not be working the way that they were envisioned to work. And so it seems to me there's money in the system that could be used to help scale this. In the U.S., I mentioned at the top, it is a public-private partnership, so nobody expects the government to pay the whole freight. And in order to get a grant from AmeriCorps to run an AmeriCorps program, you actually have to raise private sector money to match that. It's required, and you have to perform, you have to meet your goals, you have to, hit your marks, all of those things as an organization if you're deploying AmeriCorps members. And so I think some version of a public-private partnership is probably the answer here. It may not look the same as it does in the States, but I think it seems to me, just based on listening, is that there's money in the system already that might even be better used in a scheme like this to help scale this up. And I do believe that the employer piece is essential, and we are sort of late to the party over in the U.S. on that. We've been working kind of around it, but I think a more direct tie there, especially where you have industries with gaps in employment. So you've got, they can't find qualified people to work, really helping to sort of focus there. But my sense is probably the public-private partnership is the way to go.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you all so much. I'm going to close it there because we've got 2 minutes left. But I just wanted to finish by saying, well, firstly, thank you all for joining. Thank you to our panel, and thank you in particular to UK Year of Service for supporting Onward and partnering with us on this fantastic event. This is a subject that's very close to our heart, and I do think that the scale of issues within younger generations and the kind of general uncovering that we've been doing over the last few years in terms of everything from kind of social isolation and alienation, mental health issues and everything associated with that, through to some of the economic dislocation and democratic detachment within younger generations, all of which I very firmly believe are linked. I think we need to respond to the scale of that challenge with a solution which is sufficiently large to actually make a meaningful dent in it. And I don't think we are anywhere near coming up with a solution from a policy perspective that does that. And one of the things that I think has the greatest promise is the idea of a year of service, or a kind of culture of civic service, and trying to instill that in a younger generation. Alexis de Tocqueville famously called civic association the mother science. It is the kind of the yeast, as Jesse said, of a thriving democratic society. And if we're going to revive that in this country, I think we need to be thinking radically. So it's been fantastic to do that today, and I'm really grateful for all of you giving up your time to have that conversation. I'm really, really grateful to Amora for showing us the light and giving us some inspiration from across the Atlantic, but also to Jesse, who has such a steeped history in all of this, and Matt, who is doing this on the ground for leading the debate. And if you can just join me finally in giving our panel a round of applause. And I look forward to seeing all of you at future Onward events, but thank you very much. Thank you.